When people hear the name Celine Dion, they often imagine perfection, powerful vocals, global fame, and a life untouched by ordinary struggle. But behind that polished image exists a far more complex reality, especially for her eldest son, Rene-Charles. His life story doesn't begin with luxury or applause. Instead, it begins in uncertainty, shaped by medical fears, emotional pressure, and circumstances that most children never experience. From the moment he was born, he wasn't just a child. He became a symbol of hope for his parents. That kind of role may sound beautiful, but it also carries invisible weight. While the world celebrated his arrival, his family was quietly navigating fear and fragile health. This contrast, public joy and private anxiety, would define much of his upbringing. For Rene-Charles, life was never simply about growing up. It was about growing up while carrying expectations he never chose, in a world that was always watching. Rene-Charles entered the world during a deeply emotional chapter in his parents' lives. His father, Rene-Charles, was battling a serious form of cancer at the time. Meanwhile, Celine was facing her own challenges with fertility. The couple had to make difficult medical decisions, including preserving the possibility of having children through advanced procedures. This wasn't a simple journey. It was filled with uncertainty and emotional strain. When the pregnancy finally happened, it didn't feel like a guaranteed success. It felt fragile, almost uncertain. In fact, the moment Celine learned she was expecting came at the same time she received positive news about her husband's recovery. Joy and fear existed side by side. Rene-Charles wasn't just a child to them. He became a living reminder that survival was possible. But being born into such circumstances meant that his existence carried emotional significance beyond his understanding, even before he could speak or walk. His birth was celebrated worldwide, but the reality behind that moment was far more complicated. News spread quickly, and public excitement grew before the family had even processed the experience themselves. Imagine entering the world already known by millions before even opening your eyes to it. That was the beginning of Rene-Charles's life. Milestones that should have been private, first moments, early memories, were shared publicly. This early exposure quietly shaped his identity. While other children grow up discovering who they are in private, he did so under constant observation. Being labeled a miracle child may sound positive, but it comes with expectations. Expectations to be strong, to represent something bigger, to live up to a narrative created by others. These pressures don't disappear with time, they evolve. And for Rene-Charles, that label followed him into every stage of life, often without him even realizing it. As he grew older, Celine made a conscious effort to protect her son from the pressures she had faced in her own childhood. Having entered the entertainment industry at a young age, she understood the risks of early exposure. She didn't want her son to experience the same intensity. So, she chose a different path for him, one focused on protection and controlled environments. This meant limiting public exposure and carefully managing his upbringing. While this decision came from love, it also created a unique challenge. Protecting a child from the world can sometimes mean distancing them from normal experiences. For Rene-Charles, everyday routines like school, friendships, and social interactions were never entirely typical. His life was carefully structured, designed to shield him, but also separating him from the kind of freedom many children take for granted. Traditional schooling wasn't always an option for him. Due to his mother's global career, which included extensive tour and long residencies, especially in Las Vegas, his education often took place outside of a normal classroom. Tutors replaced teachers, and travel replaced stability. While this provided flexibility, it also meant fewer consistent friendships and less exposure to a regular school environment. Every new location brought changes, making it difficult to build long-term connections. Despite this, he adapted. Reports showed that he performed well academically, especially in structured subjects like mathematics. On paper, everything seemed successful, but emotional development doesn't always follow academic performance. The lack of routine and normal peer interaction can quietly shape how a child understands relationships and belonging. For Rene-Charles, learning wasn't just about books. It was about adapting to a constantly changing world. Even small aspects of his life became topics of public discussion. His appearance, for example, often attracted attention. When he chose to grow his hair long, it sparked debates online and in media circles. People questioned parenting choices, something no child should have to experience. Celine, however, stood firm. She believed in allowing her children to express themselves freely without being confined by societal expectations. This approach reflected her values, but also exposed her family to criticism. For Rene-Charles, it meant learning early on that personal choices could become public conversations. That awareness can be difficult for any young person, especially one still discovering their identity. It forces a level of self-awareness that most children don't develop until much later in life. While the outside world focused on superficial details, his family was dealing with something far more serious: ongoing health concerns. His father's condition required regular medical attention, including treatments and recovery periods. Hospitals became familiar spaces, and uncertainty became part of daily life. Even when adults tried to shield him, children often sensed tension. Rene-Charles grew up in an environment where emotional undercurrents were constant. Conversations were careful, routines were adjusted, and plans often depended on health updates. This kind of environment shapes a child's perspective. It teaches resilience, but it also introduces worry at an early age. By the time he reached adolescence, he had already developed a level of emotional awareness that many people don't reach until adulthood. As he entered his teenage years, the situation became more serious. His father's illness returned, this time with greater intensity. Treatments were more aggressive, and recovery became more uncertain. For Rene-Charles, this wasn't something distant, it was happening in front of him. He witnessed the physical and emotional toll it took on his father. This experience changes how a child sees the world. It replaces innocence with understanding. While his peers were focused on typical teenage concerns, he was learning about loss, strength, and the fragility of life. These lessons aren't taught, they're lived. And once learned, they stay with you. When his father eventually passed away, the timing made it even more difficult. The loss occurred just days before Rene-Charles's birthday. A moment that should have been filled with celebration became one of grief. This kind of emotional overlap can leave a lasting impact. It creates memories that are difficult to separate, joy and pain intertwined. For a young person, processing such emotions is incredibly challenging. There's no guide for it, no clear way to move forward. Yet, in that moment, he showed remarkable composure. At the funeral, Rene-Charles took on a role that surprised many. Standing in front of a large audience, he spoke about his father with sincerity and calmness. It wasn't a performance, it was a reflection of everything he had experienced. He shared memories, expressed gratitude, and made a promise to keep his father's presence alive for his younger siblings. This moment marked a transition. It was the point where childhood began to shift into responsibility. Not because anyone forced him, but because circumstances required it. After the funeral, life didn't simply return to normal. Grief doesn't work that way. It becomes part of everyday life, quiet, persistent, and often unnoticed by others. For Rene-Charles, it meant adjusting to a new reality. His younger brothers looked to him for understanding, while his mother carried her own grief. In this environment, he naturally stepped into a supportive role. It wasn't about replacing his father, but about maintaining stability within the family. Celine was aware of this shift and tried to prevent it from becoming a burden. She reminded him that he didn't have to take on responsibilities beyond his age. But emotional roles aren't always defined by words. They're shaped by situations. Being the oldest often comes with unspoken expectations. Rene-Charles had to find his own way of balancing those expectations with his personal growth. One of the ways he managed this was through sports, particularly hockey. On the ice, life was simpler. There were rules, structure, and clear outcomes. Effort led to results, something that doesn't always apply to emotional struggles. Sports provided an outlet, a space where he could focus on something tangible. It allowed him to step away from the complexities of his personal life, even if only temporarily. Outside of sports, he tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. He spent time with friends, engaged in everyday activities, and avoided unnecessary attention. Despite his background, he didn't seek fame. Instead, he appeared to value privacy and independence. This approach helped him maintain a sense of identity separate from his family's public image. However, public curiosity never fully disappeared. As he grew older, attention shifted from sympathy to expectation. People began to wonder what path he would choose. Would he follow in his mother's footsteps, or would he create something entirely his own? These questions can create pressure, even when they're not directly asked. Eventually, he explored music on his own terms. Without announcing it publicly, he released songs online. For a brief moment, listeners focused on the music itself. But once his identity became known, reactions changed. Comparisons began and expectations followed. It became difficult for his work to stand independently. Facing criticism, he chose to step back. Rather than pushing forward under pressure, he shifted his focus elsewhere. This decision reflected self-awareness. Sometimes, stepping away is not a sign of failure, but of understanding what is best for personal well-being. He later found interest in poker, a field that values strategy and patience. Unlike entertainment, it offered a quieter environment. Success was based on skill, not public perception. This allowed him to develop confidence without constant comparison. Years later, another challenge emerged when Celine revealed her own health condition. For Rene-Charles, this brought back memories of past struggles. Once again, he found himself supporting his family. But this time, he was older, more prepared, and emotionally stronger. Today, his story is not one of fame, but of resilience. Growing up in the spotlight didn't define him. How he responded to it did. His life shows that even in extraordinary circumstances, the desire for normalcy remains. And sometimes, strength isn't about standing out. It's about quietly holding everything together when no one is watching.